President, please be seated. The court is now in session. Before giving the floor to the defense team to put question to the civil party, the chamber first hands over the floor to Judge Lavange to put question to this civil party. You have the floor now, Judge Lavange.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, witness. I will put a few follow-up questions to you, Mr. Civil Party. This morning, you talked of the special unit which was in charge of gathering information on the enemy. That is therefore including the Vietnamese. Do you know when activities relating to information gathering started? Was that before you yourself joined the special unit or subsequently?
Civil party, when I started to work in the unit, I got the information, and the information was sent to my superior, Your Honor.
Ça, j'ai bien compris, mais
I did understand that, but did the unit start gathering information before you were assigned to the unit? Because that work, which consisted of gathering information, did it start in 1975 or before that? If you know, please say so. If you don't know, also say so.
Answer: I do not know, Your Honor.
et vous, quand est-ce que précisément?
And you yourself, when exactly did you start gathering information? Do you have a date in mind? Was that in 1975, immediately after you were enlisted in the army, or later on?
When I started the work in 1975, I was engaged in the information collection.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire combien de personnes?
And can you tell me how many persons did that work? Was it 2 or 3 of you? 30 persons? How many persons in all carried out such duties?
And if a group of 3 or 4 persons were assigned to gather information, we would go in a group of 3 or 4, and then we had to collect information in relation to the enemies.
Est-ce qu'il n'y avait qu'un seul groupe de 3 ou 4 personnes?
Was it only one group of 2 or 3 persons or several groups?
There were several groups. Sometimes my group was assigned to collect information. On other occasion, other groups were assigned to different targets. So we were assigned to different targets. There were several groups going to the battlefields to collect the information. And usually there were 4 or 5 people in one group.
Et à votre connaissance,
And to your knowledge, how many soldiers, how many persons all in all were involved in the information gathering activities? I mean all in all the groups included. If you know, please tell us how many persons were involved in such activities.
There were around 100 persons in a group or core group.
j'ai compris que vous alliez
I have understood that you went to the sites where the Vietnamese soldiers were stationed to obtain intelligence, to gather intelligence. Did your intelligence gathering work go as far as getting into contact with the soldiers, listening to what they were saying, retrieving documents, or it simply consisted in going to see where they were and to locate them?
Mr. President, when we assigned to gather the information, we did not have the contact with the Vietnamese, so we were assigned to get information how many Vietnamese were there.
Donc vous comptiez les forces.
So you counted the forces present and you indicated where they were located, where they were stationed. Was that the intelligence that was expected of you, if I properly understood your testimony?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Et pour obtenir ces renseignements,
And to gather such intelligence, were you restricted only to Cambodian territory, or you had to enter Vietnamese territory?
In the period of 1976 and 1977, we entered into Vietnamese territory to gather intelligence. And when the Vietnamese were in our territory, we were gathering intelligence within our territory. And they did the same thing. So we gathered the intelligence on our territory and also in their territory.
d'accord. Et j'ai compris.
Very well. And I understood this morning that you said there were clashes, confrontations between Cambodian intelligence groups and Vietnamese intelligence gathering groups. Did such clashes occur on Cambodian territory, on Vietnamese territory, or on both territories?
I, at one time, went into dining to encounter, and then I encountered the intelligence gathering group, one of the intelligence gathering group, and at the time we started to fire, and after the gunfire, the situation was silent at the time, was not in chaotic, and at the time I was crossing into the territory of Vietnamese, that is Dai Ninh, and I was on the I was crossing over the bridge, and then the gunfire started.
Donc là, vous faites état d'un combat.
Now you are referring to fighting that took place in Vietnam. Was there any fighting on Cambodian territory as well?
Yes, that happened in 1976. Clashes happened in on Cambodian territory. The clashes between Cambodian and Vietnamese forces on our territory. The Vietnamese forces attacked the Khmer Rouge forces, and we at one time were defeated.
Si j'ai bien compris également ce que
If I also properly understood what you said this morning, you explained that whenever there was less tension, you were taught how to lay mines. If I properly understood you this morning, you stated that you laid mines beyond enemy lines. Should I therefore understand that you laid mines in Vietnamese territory?
The intelligent gathering people were specialized in the mining and also laying mines. And usually we laid mines in the battlefront to protect ourselves, and that was done in the evening, and then the next morning we would remove the mines, and sometimes we also laid traps at the areas where the enemies came into our territory, and during the fighting there were a lot of mines.
Donc, si je comprends bien,
So if I understand you correctly, the mines and traps were laid on Cambodian territory and not on Vietnamese territory.
Yes, that is correct. But sometimes we also laid mine and traps in Vietnamese territory. It depended on the area where our forces were stationed. Sometimes we could not remove all the mines, and we even laid more mines.
est-ce que vous savez si de leur côté,
And do you know whether the Vietnamese, for their part, also laid mines and traps on Cambodian territory?
Yes, it happened as well by the Vietnamese forces. If they had gone into our territory, they would also lay mines and set traps to prevent us from going into their territory. And if the explosion was heard, then they would know.
est-ce qu'il est arrivé, alors que vous faisiez partie de l'Union,
While you were a member of the special unit, did it happen that Cambodian soldiers captured prisoners, including Vietnamese prisoners. Is that something that happened?
I never captured Vietnamese forces as prisoners of war at my post or the place where I was stationed, but usually there were casualties. Khmer Rouge forces never arrest or capture Vietnamese forces as prisoners of war because we trusted Angka and we followed the instruction by Angka not to arrest any people or prisoners of war.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer un peu plus quelles étaient...
Can you explain further what were the orders issued by Angka? You have stated that Angka's orders were not to capture any prisoners of war. What does that mean? Does it mean that you did not have the opportunity to arrest people, or did it mean that you had to kill the enemy?
There were instructions for the Khmer Rouge forces that the Khmer Rouge forces should not be arrested by the Vietnamese forces, otherwise they would be disemboweled. That was the instruction and information conveyed by the decay period. However, when the Khmer Rouge forces were arrested, they survived the arrest. They were not killed or disemboweled. However, for Khmer Rouge side, after the arrest of Vietnamese forces, they would interrogate Vietnamese soldiers and after that kill them. And it was not true, as the Khmer Rouge forces said that after the arrest, the Vietnamese soldiers would kill us.
Est-ce qu'il est arrivé que...
Did it happen that not only soldiers were arrested, but civilians were also arrested and subsequently and possibly killed? Is that something that happened?
Which forces are you referring to? You are referring to the Vietnamese force or Khmer Rouge force?
Je parle d'arrestation.
I am talking of arrests carried out by soldiers of Democratic Cambodia and arrests of either Vietnamese soldiers or Vietnamese civilians. You have stated that there were instructions that Vietnamese soldiers be interrogated and subsequently killed. I would like to know whether there were also instructions for Vietnamese civilians to be arrested.
As for the instructions of the decay period, actually there were no instructions to arrest the Vietnamese forces. Usually after the arrest of Vietnamese forces, all of them were killed, and when Khmer Rouge encountered Vietnamese forces, they would exterminate the whole family. That happened during the battlefield.
Vous êtes né dans le district...
You were born in Kampong Ru district in Sre Veng commune. Where you lived, were there any Vietnamese civilians living there with you, the Cambodians?
Est-ce que dans votre commune, est-ce que dans votre village,
In your commune and village, were there any Vietnamese living side by side with you, Cambodians?
Yes, in the former regime, we were living side by side. I mean, Vietnamese were living side by side with our people. But later on, there was a policy to send all Vietnamese back home after the war. In the past period, yes, Vietnamese people were living together with Khmer people.
Correction by French-English interpreter. The province was Svai Rieng.
est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire quand a été mis en place cette...
Can you tell us when the policy aimed at sending all Vietnamese back to their home was established? Was that before the 17th of April 1975 or thereafter? And did any Vietnamese stay back?
To my recollection, after 17 April 1975, there was the exchange program to send back Vietnamese to Vietnam, and Khmer people would be sent back to Cambodia. And after that date, Vietnamese people did not dare to stay by in Cambodia, and they were sent along Kampong Oro back to Vietnamese. Khmer people were being sent back at the time to Cambodia, and some people were being killed. By 1975, all of Vietnamese were sent out to their home country.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire qui se faisait...
Can you tell us who were executed? You have said some people were executed. Can you tell us who were those who were executed, when and why?
Uncle Pearl and Uncle Time were exchanged with the Vietnamese, and after the exchange program, they were sent for execution. Many Cambodians were the subject of exchange program, and some of them were sent for a study session, but in fact they were killed. After learning the information, the Vietnamese side did not send back Cambodian people to Cambodia, and as I said, all of them, after they were sent back from Vietnam, were killed.
Est-ce que vous savez pourquoi ils...
Do you know why they were killed?
I do not know the reason. They consider those people the new people, and also CIA agent. Those people needed to be killed. They did not survive the killing. Some women survived, but not male people. My villagers died, and at the time, after hearing that people died after they were sent back to Cambodia, they did not decide to come back home. After 1979, my people came back to the country, but not before 1970. 9 because some of them learned that if they were sent back home to Cambodia, they would be killed.
Est-ce que pendant le Kampuchea démocratique,
During the democratic Kampuchea regime after the 17th of April 1975, are you aware of the existence of mixed families, that is, families that consisted of Vietnamese and Cambodian couples? Do you know what happened to those families?
In 1975, they went back to Vietnam in group. They did not dare to stay in Cambodia, and they returned to Cambodia after 1979. So back in the past, in 1975, they went together with their spouses. They did not dare to remain in Cambodia. And there was one family, they were old at the time, and they remained staying in Cambodia, but most of them, or all of them, decided to go back to Vietnam. Some of them could stay in Cambodia because they hid their biography.
et ces familles qui sont restées au Cambodge, elles ont survécu au régime?
And did the families that remained back in Cambodia survive the regime? And if they did survive, why did they survive? Why were they not executed?
They survived the regime. For example, Ye Hui was quite old back then, so she could remain living in Cambodia. She had a Cambodian husband. She was quite old at the time, so she could live her normal life. And her children now possessed a Cambodian identity. She has already passed away at the present time, but back in the regime, she lived in the cooperative and having a collective meal with within the cooperative.
Et est-ce qu'on savait que cette personne...
And was it known that that person was of Vietnamese origin, or did she succeed in concealing her biography?
I do not know on this particular point why she could survive the regime, but not the others. I do not know. Perhaps at the time she may have used the biography as Cambodian person. People living in the area loved her and socialized with her. And I do not know if she had concealed her biography and how she could survive the regime.
Bien, je vous remercie, Monsieur le témoin.
Thank you, Civil Party, for your answers. Mr. President, I have no further questions for the Civil Party.
President, I thank you very much. And now the floor is given to the defense team for the accused, starting first from the defense team for Mr. Nguyen Jie. You may now proceed to put question to the Civil Party.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honours, Council, and good afternoon, Mr. Civil Party. You've spoken this morning about your work in the special unit, and you also just spoke about it now with Judge Levin. But there are a few details that were still unclear to me. So I just wanted to ask you first 2 follow-up questions about that. So my first question is, do you know how many members were in the special unit in total?
There were around 150 soldiers in total.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. And my second question on this issue is, were all of the members of the special unit involved in intelligence gathering, or did they have a mix of duties?
In the special unit, if there were intense battlefields, they would be selected to be engaged in the fighting.
I'm sorry, so I wanted to understand a bit more clearly. Are you saying that when there was intense fighting, all members of the special unit would be engaged in the fighting, but if there was not intense fighting, then they would be gathering information? Do I understand you correctly?
That is correct, Counsel. Usually we gathered the intelligence, and when there was intense situation, we would be engaged in the fighting. And for normal battlefield or fighting, the ordinary forces would be engaged in the fighting.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Just one more question about this, and I'll move on to my second topic. Were you yourself ever involved in fighting against the Vietnamese or other forces?
Yes, I participated in combats quite often. I did not have free time.
This might be a difficult question to answer, but can you remember during your time as a soldier in the special unit how much of your time was spent intelligence gathering and how much of your time was spent fighting?
After we collected the intelligence information and then we prepared our force for combat, and we let our troops to identify and tell them the weak points that we could attack. And if our troops chose to attack and then the attack took place, and it depends on the situation. If our special force wanted to join with the ordinary combat force to fight, and then we stay and fight. If we didn't want to, or the situation did not require, we withdrew back and we left only the combat force to engage in fighting.
Thank you for your answer. So now I'm going to move to my second topic, and that is to ask you some follow-up questions about the time when you were arrested by the Southwest Zone soldiers. My first question in this regard is that in both your testimony today and in your civil party application, you said that you were arrested together with 29 East Zone soldiers. My question is, do you know what the duties of the 29 East Zone soldiers were right before they were arrested together with you?
បាទលោកប្រធាន
When I, along with the other soldiers, totaling 29 of us, we did not know about each other rank, but all of us were from the East Zone soldiers, but we were from different units in the zone, and I could not remember all their names.
No problem, Mr. Civil Party. I will move on to a different question. In your civil party application, you said something that I want to ask you a bit more about. Mr. President, this is document E3/4950, and the relevant ERNs are in Khmer 00550646, in English 01057923, and in French 00895317. And Mr. Civil Party, this is the quote from your application. You said, and I quote, "I protested that I was innocent and should not be arrested. My captor yelled at me not to protest as, he said, the order was made from the party." Unquote. Mr. Civil Party, my first question in this regard is, did you see any document about the order for your arrest?
បាទលោកប្រធានខ្ញុំ
No, I did not see the document of the order of my arrest. They simply recorded our names and then they arrested us. I had no idea where the order came from.
Thank you. So now I'm going to move to ask you a little bit more about why they said that you were arrested. Now today at 10:02, I understood that you said that Southwest Zone soldiers arrested you and they said that they needed to purge bad elements who were those with Yun heads and Khmer bodies. I also heard you say at 10:07 and at 11:02 that you were accused of betraying the party or being a traitor. My question is, did the Southwest Zone soldiers say anything else about why you were arrested?
I protested the arrest of us by the soldier from the Southwest Zone. They accused us of betraying the party, of betraying the people. They arrested us, and at night time they tied our hand up and walked us away to be killed.
Did any of the Southwest Zone soldiers interrogate you right after you were arrested?
They did not interrogate us because they were in a hurry to take us to be killed. I was the only one who dared to protest. The rest of us did not dare to protest. They took off our clothes and we had only shorts. We wore only shorts. They did not ask us whether we came from any units or any division because they were in a hurry to take us away to be killed.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to come back to discuss some of those events with you a little bit later in my questions. But now I wanted to move on to my next topic, and that is to discuss with you a little bit more about the conflict between the Southwest Zone and the East Zone, which you've already discussed quite a bit this morning. So this morning you mentioned that you joined the revolution in 1975 and that you attended study sessions from time to time. Did you ever hear during the early study sessions about conflict or tension with the Southwest Zone already in 1975?
When I joined the revolution in 1975, there was no tension between us. There were no such conflict at that time. We consider us as one army, and we had no problem between us.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Now about something else that you said this morning about the conflict with the Southwest Zone. At 9:50 this morning, you mentioned that soldiers who you described as being from the center confiscated weapons from those on the front lines in Sector 23. We also have evidence on the case file about weapons being confiscated from soldiers on the front lines in another East Zone sector, Sector 21, and I want to ask you something about that now and see if this jogs your memory about further events in this regard. Mr. President, this is the interview of Uk Bun Chun by the academic Steve Hedder on 14 August 1990. Mr. Civil Party, as you may know, Uk Bun Chun was the Deputy Secretary of Sector 21 of the East Zone and is currently a CPP Senator. Mr. President, the document references are E3/387 and the ERNs are in Khmer 00379503, in English 00350218-19, and in French 00441436. Mr. Civil Party, Uk Bun Chun is in this interview describing events in Sector 21 in the East Zone, and this is the relevant part of what he says. Quote, "In early 1978, I gradually began hiding weapons. I also instructed districts which were under my sector that when combatants in the front line fighting the Vietnamese forces ran back and had weapons, we had to take and keep their weapons." And then a little bit later, Uk Bun Chun continues, "We did not supply the weapons to battlefields. We secretly kept them in our sector." Unquote. Mr. Civil Party, my question is, does this refresh your memory about whether, in your sectors 23 and 24, weapons were taken from soldiers returning from the battlefront with the Vietnamese, not by forces from the center, but by East Zone forces?
When my weapon was confiscated, I did not know who they were, but I'm confident that it was the soldiers from the center who came to confiscate from soldiers in Sector 23 in Ramir Hai district. and they came from Division 703. They were the one who came and confiscated our weapons in Sector 23. As for Ok Bun Chun, I did not know him. I did not know about what was going on in that sector.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Just on something that you said then, you said that you were confident that the soldiers who confiscated your weapon were from the Southwest Zone or from Division 703. I'm not sure if I heard you clearly. How did you know that?
At that time, they said that those soldiers came from the center. So when they confiscated our weapons, they told us like that. So I simply follow what they told us. I could not use any other different words beside what they told us.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. So now I'm going to move, we're still on the same topic, but I'm going to move a bit more generally. And I would like to ask you, what did you know about why there was a conflict between the Southwest and East zones?
I did not know the details at that time. I only knew when the arrest took place, and then they said that the East Zone soldiers betrayed the party. So I only learned about that conflict between the two zones only when the arrest took place and they accused us of betraying the party. While in fact, we did not have such treacherous intention. We only loved the Khmer people and defend our country. But at the end, they accused us in that way.
Thank you. In both your civil party application and also throughout your testimony today, you have been talking about the existence of a coup d'etat. I understand that the Khmer term you have been using for coup d'etat is rot prahan. My question is, when you were using the term coup d'etat or rot prahan, what events were you describing?
At that time, there were fightings between Khmer Rouge soldiers, between soldiers from the center and the East Zone. And at that time, I heard people using the word coup d'etat to describe that incident, and I did not know much about it, but I simply follow the words that people used at that time.
Thank you. Now, you just said in answer to one of my earlier questions that you did not have traitorous intentions, and I understand that. My question now is, did you ever hear anything about secret plans being made in the East Zone during the Democratic Kampuchea period to rise up against the center?
I was not aware of such plan. I was based at the front line area. I did not know about what's going on in the back battlefield. And I was simply a normal combatant. I could not know about such a plan that was developed at a higher level.
No problem, Mr. Civil Party. So today you've spoken about battles with the Vietnamese, and we'll come back to talk about that later. And you've also talked about battles with forces from the center, forces from the Southwest Zone. I'm wondering, did you ever hear anything about a battle in the neighboring province of Pre Veng between the East Zone Secretary Sarpim and his troops against troops of the center?
Yes, I heard about it. I heard about the fighting between Sarpim's forces with soldiers from the center. There was fighting taking place.
Okay, I'm going to have a few questions for you just about this incident now. First, do you remember if this fighting happened before you were arrested by the soldiers of the Southwest Zone or after?
The incident of fighting with Sarpim took place first before the arrest of us.
Thank you. And now I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same incident. So what I would like to do is to read to you testimony of another witness in this trial who talks about what I think is the same incident and check with you whether you think that that is so. Mr. President, this is document E3/9467, and it's an interview which has numbered questions and answers, so the questions that I'm focusing on are 15, 17, 19, and 21. It is the interview of an East Zone combatant with the investigating judges of this tribunal on 11 October 2013. Mr. Civil Party, I'm just going to read to you some of this witness's testimony and see if you think this is the same incident we're talking about now. Quote, in answer 15, in around July or August in 1978, the party committee of Sarpim agitated us to rearm. Sarpim was the zone secretary there. I joined that movement in order to fight the Khmer Rouge. Sarpim arranged for me to be positioned along National Road 15. The Khmer Rouge soldiers came from the southwest and the west to surround the East Zone. And then the witness continues in answer 17 to say the following. About 8,000 people joined the movement. This movement was organized quickly and spontaneously while being surrounded by aircraft, tanks, and infantry. At answer 19, he says, the weapons used were from the zone warehouse because they had been collected and stored there. And finally, at answer 21, the witness says, the Khmer Rouge appealed for us to surrender by dropping leaflets from the planes for 3 days, but we did not surrender. Unquote. Mr. Civil Party, does this sound at all like the incident you were talking about?
I did not know much about the details of how many thousands of people were mobilized, because my unit was based in isolation from the rest of other units. I did not have, my unit did not have much contact or participated in the meeting where you said there were thousands of people were gathered. There were no such thing happened with my units.
No problem. Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. So now my questions are moving in a different direction, and we are going to focus a little bit on the night that you were arrested by the Southwest Zone forces. And the first area I would like to discuss with you is the executions that took place. I'm going to read to you something that you said in your civil party application. Mr. President, that is E3/4950 at the ERNs 00550646 in Khmer, 01057923 in English, and 00895317 in French. Mr. Civil Party, this is the quote. Quote, "The Khmer Rouge cadres had started to arrest and kill the East Zone soldiers." And then a bit later you continue to say, "We were made to walk in two lines to where we would be executed." Unquote. So, first question, how did you know that you were going to be executed?
After they had our hands tied up, they walked us in the night and they ordered us to sit down. And the Khmer Rouge soldiers of 8 men who carried AK rifles, they took a few of us and killed. And we heard the screams, so we were panicked and we tried to escape. And when it happened, we had no clothes on our bodies.
I'm going to ask you some questions about all of that information shortly, but I just wanted to clarify one thing with you first. Did anyone tell you that you were going to be executed?
But
no one told us. But during the time that they registered our name, a lady told me that that my group was the third group. That I and other people with me were the third group who were registered, and people in the previous 2 groups disappeared. And she told me to be careful, so I became very worried. And I tried to be careful as what she told me. So after she told me that, all of us, 2 or 3 of us at a time, were tied up and walked away to the execution site. And it was that place, when we arrived there, that things became clearer.
So just to talk about that lady for a minute, was she a soldier?
but
Perhaps she's also a soldier. she said that she was alone who was sent to the area in order to boil the water for the Khmer Rouge soldiers. And when she told me that, she said with teary eyes, and it was the time when I went to relieve myself at the banana tree, and she saw me at that place, and she whispered to me to be careful about what would be happening. So it was when she told me that it was not among the group of people. It was at the time when I relieved myself at the banana tree.
But just to be sure, so she was boiling water for the troops from the Southwest Zone. Is that correct?
The lady who told me was kept by the Khmer Rouge soldiers to be a cook, to boil water and cook rice for the soldiers. Because at that time, commanders and senior cadres in the Swai province were all removed. And at the time when I, along with others, were taken away to be killed, among those people were new cadres. As for the old senior cadres, they had all long been removed.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. So, just a moment ago, you were talking about how soldiers were untied and taken away to be killed. And this is also something you discussed earlier this morning at around 10:09. And I recall that you said that you could hear them screaming. And then you explained that you and the other arrested soldiers tried to run away, and then that only 3 of you managed to escape. I have 2 questions about this, and they might be a little bit difficult, so I just want to explain them first. So, Mr. Civil Party, it seems to me that you are describing 2 different ways in which your fellow East Zone soldiers died. One way was where the Southwest Zone soldiers took the East Zone soldiers away to be executed 4 people at a time. And the other way was where the East Zone soldiers tried to escape but were shot and killed while trying to run away. I don't know if you can answer this, but my first question is, among the 29 East Zone soldiers that you were arrested with, can you estimate how many were killed the first way, that is, by being taken away by the Southwest Zone soldiers to be executed?
Please observe them. Please wait, Mr. Civil Party. You have the floor first. International Deputy Co-Prosecutor.
Your Honour, objection to the question in terms of the fact that the witness has given two different events to how his colleagues were killed. I think maybe the question should be which way, can you clarify which way or how were your colleagues killed? But I don't think he's given 2 different versions of events, and so I don't think he should be given the opportunity to pick one or the other. I think he should be asked just to clarify how it in fact happened, because I don't think he gave 2 versions of the events. So just for clarification.
Mr. President, maybe my question was unclear in this sense. I heard the witness say that, first of all, a group of people were taken away to be executed. Upon seeing that, the other soldiers, who he says were waiting their turn to be executed, then tried to escape and many of them were shot in the process. So what I'm trying to get at is how many were shot while escaping and how many were already executed. Mr. Civil Party, can you shed any light on this?
When we were gathered for execution, 4 of my members had already been gathered before they came to arrest us. My group consisted of 3, and 1 person was injured by the bullet shot. I was submersing myself into the water at the river bank, and at the time when I started to get out of the water, they started to fire me, and I had to do that again, and some of us were shot while being tied up. President, you may have confused. The question is about the number of people in your group who had been gathered for execution. So how many of you survived, and how many people from your group died? From what I heard, 4 people could fled and survive, and 3 people could fled and survive, and 4 others died. And as you said, the list of names, as you said, you said that there were around 20, more than 20 people or 29 people in the list. Civil Party. In fact, there were 29 of us in our group, and 4 died. 3 could flee. So again, 26 people from my group died, and only 3 could survive. We were put in the 2 groups at a time, but the total number of the people in the 2 groups were 29.
So, Mr. Civil Party, just to see if I have this correctly, did 4 people get taken away to be executed, then everybody else from the 29 East Zone soldiers tried to escape, but only 3 of you survived? Is that right?
That is correct. Only 3 people could flee, and the rest were killed while being tied up.
Thank you, Mr. Civil Party. Mr. President, I'm about to move to my next line of questions, so perhaps this is a good time to break.
President, thank you. It is now time for a break. The chamber will take a short break from now until 3 p.m. Court officer, please assist the Civil Party in the waiting room during the break time, and please invite him back into the courtroom at 3 p.m. The court is now in recess.